Hello and welcome to Prog and Progeny. It is our 11th episode, Chapter 8.
My God.
We have some news. We switched over to Patreon and that's gone quite well, although we did have some technical hiccups for our most loyal listeners. You would have realised that we didn't manage to get an episode out. Well, we did manage to get it out last Wednesday. To our horror, it didn't upload to Spotify or Apple.
I think it's been fixed, although I have to say our number of listeners has dropped off quite a lot, but hopefully it will pick up.
We did have someone in our Instagram DM saying they still couldn't see it on Apple Podcasts, which is very annoying.
I won't bore you with the reason why, but hopefully it's been fixed. But apart from that, the move to Patreon seems to have gone smoothly. People are very positive about the move. We've had some nice interactions with people, including an organised meet-up in Berlin outside Hansa Studios, which was a really nice half-an-hour chat. I felt like a tour guide talking about Hansa and our days in Berlin and explaining, oh yeah, the wall used to run just down the end of this street, cut the street in half and stuff like that. So I think in that sense, the Patreon thing is really good and will work well in the future. I will remind you, if you were a subscriber to Buzzsprout, you need to cancel it if you haven't already, because there's still a few people that haven't. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider liking it or subscribing or adding it to your episodes on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help us reach more people, and we really appreciate it. Also, if you go to Patreon, you can find Prog and Progeny there, and if you subscribe, you will get access to some of my music that isn't available anywhere else, and I'll be adding more music over the coming months.
So we're going to split this episode in two parts, as it's quite a long chapter with a lot of meat. So this is the first half of the chapter, and the second half will be in our next episode. And then after that, I think we're going to interview Simon.
That's the plan. Early July, we're going to get Simon in for a chat. If you haven't already subscribed, don't forget, we've got a Patreon Prog and Progeny page now. If you go to Patreon, look us up, and you get to hear some exciting music. As promised, I uploaded a track, which I called 4000 AD because of the little talking sample that I included in it, which I have to admit, I recorded that at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The MoMA. It was like a little art installation with just this recording that counted through all the years. And I just recorded 30 seconds of it, and that's what you can hear in the track. I just thought it was really evocative and interesting. What's on the agenda today?
Chapter 8.
Kill the Pape.
Kill the Pape. Yeah,
Fish used to call me the Pape. Even though I wasn't really Catholic, as you know, I'm a bit of an atheist.
What's a Pape?
A Pape is like an insult, really, what Scottish Protestants would call Catholics. He was kind of playing a part. He was pretending to be like a Glasgow Rangers supporter, which he wasn't. He's a Hibs supporter, which is Hibernian on the East Coast rather than the West. And Glasgow traditionally hate Celtic supporters, who are the Catholics. So it's the Catholics and the Protestants, age-old rivalry. So he would make out that he was the Glasgow supporter and I was the Pape, and he would try and kill me. which involved jumping on me and on the bus at random. He would, he'd have a few drinks inside him, and we'd be on the tour bus travelling somewhere, and he'd suddenly leap up and jump on me and start punching me in the head, all in good humour. Well,
yeah, I was going to ask.
He's a big guy, and he could hurt you. As we know, he dislocated my shoulder at one occasion, so I kind of wasn't enjoying it as much as he. Would you fight back? Not really. I just told him to get the fuck off.
So you are recording your second album in Wales.
We had to write it first, and that was
you had to write it. Sorry, you went residential.
Yeah, I think it was because we didn't have a studio. We had nowhere to work, as a band. So it was a case of, we could either go to London and go to like a London rehearsal studio, or go residential, as you say. And residential usually meant money. So we went somewhere cheap, which was this place called Mountain. Doesn't sound as glamorous as the Mountain Studios in Switzerland, in Montreux, where Queen recorded, and I think Queen actually owned that studio at one point. And Yes recorded Going for the One. and various other people have worked. This was like a cottage on a hillside in Wales, with its own stone circle at the top of the hill, and resident hippies running it. You know, it was like a real hippie commune, really.
Right.
So yeah, not glamorous at all. And I think they were somehow linked to the drugs trade, because there was a lot of drugs around, as far as I remember. Wasn't really what we had in mind. We were thinking getting away from civilization and living just for the music, but it kind of was. It was a bit weird.
Did anyone partake in the drug?
I'm sure they did. Yeah, I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to get people in trouble.
It's a bit late for that.
Sorry, everybody, who I got in trouble so far. Yeah, and we were really basic because, you know, again, nobody had recording equipment like you would now, or even a few years later. It was the very early days of the band, and the only thing we had was what's called a Porter studio. Now, some people out there will know what that is. It's like like the old-fashioned cassettes. It was a cassette machine, but instead of being stereo, where you would play the tape on one side and then turn it over and play the other side, it was designed to play all 4 tracks, because it's stereo, obviously 2 tracks. So you'd have a stereo cassette has actually got 4 tracks, 2 playing one way, 2 playing the other. It was designed to play all 4 tracks in one direction. So that effectively meant it was like a very small multi-track recorder. You could record 4 tracks at once or individually. So it was kind of like a very basic home studio, which is what we used to record the demos. And there is actually a demo kicking around somewhere of Assassin, which was the song that we came up with while we were there. The intro was completely different to how it ended up, thankfully, because it wasn't very good. And Andy Ward was on drums. So we were all happy to have him in the band. This was before we realised that he had a bit of a drink problem.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
So,
but talk us through your writing process and how it all works.
The first thing you have to realise is that we didn't have much time. We had a few weeks then and a few weeks in the autumn because we had a US tour booked in the summer. So the idea of having to write an album in a matter of weeks was a real daunting prospect, because don't forget, prior to that, the first album was written over a number of years. The way it used to work then was somebody would come up with an idea or even a good chunk of a song. We would learn it and arrange it, work on it a bit and play it at gigs. And over time, it might evolve and change. But there was no recording of it. We had to remember how it went. Yeah. And that was it. So at first, we didn't even have enough songs for a long set. So the sets were probably an hour and 15. And then as new songs were written, the worst of the songs would get played less often and get kind of forgotten about. So by the time you get to your first album, you've actually got enough material to record an album, and probably with a few songs left over, which is where we were. Come to the second album, it's a clean slate. Okay, now we have to write 45 minutes worth of music and lyrics in the space of a few weeks. Fish already had quite a few lyrics written, as I think I mentioned earlier in the book. So for him, it wasn't such a stress, but for us, we felt kind of under pressure to come up with some songs. And I think that's not very helpful when you're trying to be creative. Right. But the process then was literally not a lot different to how it is now. Somebody would come up with an idea, we'd all play along, work out what we're going to do, decide if it's any good. Who
produces the most ideas?
Back then, it was definitely Steve Rothery. Most of the musical ideas came from him. I would say probably 2/3 him, 1/3 me. Okay. With very occasionally, Pete might come up with something. But Pete and Ian's well, it wasn't Ian at that point, it was Andy. Their contribution obviously is invaluable, because you can see if somebody starts playing, if Steve starts playing something or I start playing something without the rest of the band joining in, it maybe isn't as obvious that it's going to be a song, you know.
Yeah.
We kind of work together in that way.
But now, how would you say it's balanced?
The last couple of albums, I've probably written the majority of the music. Well, written is not the right word. I would say I've originated the majority of the music, as in it started from an idea that I had, which was then developed by everybody. I think it's wrong to say that this person wrote this piece of music or that piece of music. You know, it's more one person will start it, which is obviously the most important part of writing it. Someone's got to come up with an idea,
Yeah.
And then
but
everybody
it could
works
be completely different by the time it's done.
This is true, yeah. So it's very much a band effort, writing our music.
Does Steve Hogarth, maybe contribute more to the music production than Fish did, do you think?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And he has contributed musical ideas and the whole musical section. In fact, the song Easter, which was one of the first we did with Steve, he wrote, the first 2/3 of it was all of his music. He pretty much worked out what he was going to use for the verse, the chorus, and then it was like a bridge section or an instrumentally section, which became a big guitar solo. But there was all his chords and arrangement, if you like. And then we kind of Marillionized it, made it longer, added a guitar solo, and then we went into this section at the end, which is the What Will You Do, Make a Stone of Your Heart. That section was a band effort, starting with a riff that Steve Rothery came up with. So, I mean, that's a good example of how we can take an idea and then develop it, as a band.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, a song like Fantastic Place, Steve Hogarth had a big hand in writing the music for that. And The Party was another one. And Holloway Girl. His musical contribution is much more than Fish's. And of course, he also comes up with vocal melodies the same as Fish did. It's very rare for a member of the band to suggest a vocal melody, although it has happened. Yeah, so we left Wales with only one song half written, really. It was a bit of a disappointment. The next thing we had to do was go to the USA on tour. I'd never been to the USA before. In fact, I'd never even been out of the country, which is why I had to get a passport, and then found out that I was Irish. That was a surprise. No,
you knew you were Irish.
I knew I was Irish, but because I'd lived in England for most of my life, I just assumed, stupidly, that I could just apply for a British passport and they would send me one. I was slightly surprised when they wrote back and said, you're not actually British, but if you want to be British, you can apply to be naturalised. I did actually get naturalised in 2019, finally, when they had the...
I don't see why, because everyone wanted an Irish passport post 2018.
I know. I like to be different. It was mainly because of Karina. When she moved to the UK from Brazil, she came here on a work visa, and if she left her job, she would have to leave. So we decided to switch to a spouse visa when we got married. I don't know, with everything that was going on with Brexit and the whole anti-immigration thing, I just thought I would be in a better position to argue that she should stay in the country if I was British rather than Irish. So I thought it'd be straightforward to get a British passport. I've been here for 50 years or
Was
more.
it straightforward?
Reasonably, although I had to go for this ceremony where you have to swear allegiance to the Queen and all that. And the guy that officiated, it was a very official guy with robes on and stuff. He said something like, "You've got the privilege of being the longest lived person in the UK that's applied for a British passport that I know of." And I've been doing this for 30 years, yeah. Well, because it'd be unusual to live here for so long and then get a passport,
Did you have to answer any patriotic questions?
I did. I had to answer a quiz to check that you're British enough, I'm telling you, Tallulah, you're smart and you're well educated. I wouldn't struggle.
Get them. Yeah.
You would struggle to answer about half these questions. Some of them were so...
Can you remember any of them?
Oh, just things like stuff about... There was some legal questions in there about the judiciary and how the UK law operates. There was stuff about the royal family. And then there was even stuff about popular culture, like EastEnders or something like that.
Oh, really?
It was very broad spectrum Britishness quiz.
Strange.
They say if you just read this book, it's quite a short book. All the answers were in this book, so I just read the book and that was it. And you have to do a test as well to prove that you can read and write in English.
How did you do on that? Just pass.
I did all right, I think. I think my reading and writing is okay. Luckily, when I applied for the Irish passport, I could get it in one day. It was literally go to the Irish embassy and they'll give you a passport, so that was fine. And then off we flew to New York. And I was so excited because I'd never been out of the country, really. It was really exciting. I remember that arriving at JFK and seeing New York City. Everybody who's been there has done it, haven't they? And then driving into New York and
the skyline.
And the heat, because it was the middle of July, it was so hot. And we had a rehearsal studio booked for a few days to get ready because I think we had to have a lot of hired equipment. We couldn't bring everything with us, so it was a case of seeing what we could do with the hired equipment, make sure it was still, that it was actually serviceable and all the rest of it. And I remember, this is embarrassing because there was a drinks machine and they had Dr. Pepper, and I'd never tasted Dr. Pepper before, and I
hate
kind
Dr. Pepper.
I couldn't drink it now, but I loved it at the time. I just drank nothing else the whole time I was there. We stayed at the Mayflower Hotel, which is closed down now. It was on near Columbus Circle, on the edge of Central Park. It's like one of those grand old hotels that was kind of saw its best days about 50 years earlier, you know. And I remember things like the breakfast being like really huge with things like that I'd never had before, like hash browns and an Americano coffee. And and everything you order, they've got 100 questions. It's like, you know, you ask for some toast and they go, what do you want? Rye, wheat, brown, white?
Yeah.
Just toast. Just toast will be fine. I like some fried eggs. Fried eggs, how would you like them? What do you mean, how would you like them? Fried?
Sunny side up.
Yeah, exactly. Over easy sounds good. I'll have that, yeah.
That's so funny because that's how you make eggs normally now. Is that what you always...
Yeah,
over easy?
I've never had my first experience of over easy eggs, which I agree is a good way to cook them.
I remember being a child and you going, you've got to have them over easy.
My American experience coming out there.
Gets rid of the wobbly bits.
Exactly, but it keeps the yolk runny. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Long Island iced teas. That was the drink. Oh, Jack and Coke. We started drinking Jack and Coke and probably drank that for the next 10 years. But the Long Island iced tea incident, which I mentioned in the book, where me and Steve Rothery got completely drunk before a gig, which was very unprofessional. Drinking Long Island iced tea because it sounded like a nice, refreshing drink. Didn't realise it was vodka, triple sec, gin,
tequila,
rum. Yeah, it's like...
It's what you call a shit mix.
Is it?
Yeah.
But then they put Coke and a bit of lemon juice to give it that kind of iced tea flavour.
Yeah. Is it iced tea flavoured? Sure.
It kind of is. Well, with a lot of alcohol.
And you said that you couldn't stand up. You were supporting yourself against the keyboards on stage.
Totally drunk. Embarrassingly so, as was Steve, yeah.
Was it a bad gig?
I think it must have been. I don't think we cared too much, so... Although Steve never touched a drop of alcohol again before a gig after that.
Were the others pissed off, or can you not remember?
I doubt it. I mean, I can remember a couple of times with Andy. As you can tell, we weren't exactly teetotal.
No.
But Andy was definitely in a different league, and there was a couple of nights when his playing wasn't really as good as it should have been because of alcohol. And it was hard for us to be critical of him because we were not like we were being saints, you know, we were drinking quite a lot ourselves, but not before the gig normally.
Yeah.
But it was the whole, the journeys in the minibus, which was horrible. Long drives.
Yeah,
we didn't
that
have a
sounds
tour
awful.
bus. Yeah.
In the heat.
And poor old Clutch in the back. I can remember that. No shirt on because it was so hot. Yeah, he was a really, really nice guy, Clutch. Merchandise. His real name was Ian Ritchie. I don't know why they called him Clutch. But he died in an accident. He was hit by a truck on his motorbike probably about 10 years ago, I heard.
Oh my God.
Yeah, very sad.
That's really sad.
Nice. He was a Kiwi. All the merchandise guys seem to be from New Zealand. I'm not sure why that was. It's true. Well, yeah, so Andy, I'll keep going back to Andy, but and I'm not to be
Poor
critical
Andy.
of him because he's a really sweet guy. I'm sure he still is, and because he found out many years later that he was bipolar, which was kind of
Explained a lot.
Explained a lot, exactly, because he was kind of depressed sometimes, and then he'd be happy other times. He was quite a fun guy to be around. He was always joking around, and and he was a really good drummer. And even though after his stint with Camel, so he tried to kill himself and slashed his wrist, but across his wrist and through the tendon, so he damaged the tendon, so he couldn't grip properly with his right hand. So he had like a big pad on his drumstick so he could hold it without dropping it. So he didn't have the power that he used to have, probably.
He had that when he played with you guys?
Yeah.
Did you not ask why?
It's not really something that you want to... Why did you try to kill yourself? Questions.
No. But I mean, like, did you know it was because he tried to kill himself? But I mean, when he joined the band, you knew that he'd had a history of mental health issues.
No, not at all. No, we just knew that he'd had this suicide attempt and had some time off.
That wasn't a warning sign.
It should have been, shouldn't it? Yeah. And the idea that he wanted to join us, I think we were very excited about, you know. We realised once we were in America that the drinking was a problem. But then we kind of decided...
Was everyone just turning a blind eye, kind of?
Yeah, till we got to New York, when on the way to New York, he was really drunk, throwing bottles out of the van in Harlem. Not a good idea.
Why?
Well, because it's a really rough area and you end up getting killed, apart from the littering aspect of it. Yeah, then we get to New York eventually, after the longest ride of our lives, because he was just drunk. And then our rooms weren't ready. This always happens. You know, you get to a hotel and they go, "Oh, sorry, sir, your room's not ready." So there we all were, sitting around in the lobby, bored out of our minds. Andy's drunk. He then went into the hotel bar and had some more alcohol. He comes out, decides to buy some cigarettes from one of those cigarette machines. He puts his money in the machine, pulls the slot, and the entire contents of the machine pours out of the machine into the tray below. I don't know what he did. Only happens to a drunk, right? But you know what he does? Picks up all these boxes of cigarettes out of the tray and starts handing them out to everybody in the lobby.
Oh my God.
Imagine how that went down with the hotel. Anyway, so then we had a meeting and decided that we should send him home. Well, we should all go home, I think, because we kind of had enough by then. So
that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it's a real shame because we ended up cancelling 2 weeks of dates, which were mostly in the South, in Florida and Texas. And because of that, we never really went there again. Our popularity is definitely East Coast, West Coast, the Midwest, like Chicago, and no further south than Lake Washington. So
this isn't a generalization, but I'm not sure that your music, especially now, would attract a southern crowd.
Well, you'd be surprised. In places like Austin in Texas, I think we would have been fine. And, you know, there are more progressive parts to the South.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying.
I know.
I mean progressive in the political sense, not the musical sense.
I mean, considering a lot of the meaning behind a lot of your songs, it's quite left-leaning.
I've never done a survey of how many Trump supporters we have at our gigs. But
this is what I mean. Back then it's a bit different, but... Yeah,
it'd be an interesting thing to check how Marillion's popularity tracks compared to red states, blue states. I've got a feeling that we're more blue than red, aren't we? Our music is more blue than red. For the British listeners, that means would be considered more red than blue in the UK. We're kind of around the other way here, aren't we?
Yeah. Do you think you're more red than blue in the UK?
More left-wing than right-wing?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
You've definitely gotten more right-wing over the years. Yeah.
As you get older, you move from the left to the right. I just like to play the devil's advocate.
So we went out for dinner the other day. It nearly ended in a shouting match between me my sister, and Dad.
We had a little bit of a disagreement.
We won't get into what it was about.
Because we don't do politics on this podcast.
But if you read the news, you might be able to have a guess.
Oh, the final gig before we came home.
Yeah.
The fish got a peach thrown at him, which I cover in some detail, actually, in the book. But I think you want me to say what Fish said, right, with a Scottish accent.
I do, yes.
But I can't really do a Scottish accent.
You did one perfectly well in our brief chat before the podcast.
Okay, so yeah, we're on stage at the Pier in New York City. It's like an open-air gig by the Hudson River, I think. And there was quite a hostile audience, I think. There were Todd Rundgren's crowd we were supporting. And somebody threw a peach at Fish, and it smacked him right in the chest. Big stain on his shirt. And he said, "And now I'd like to say thank you very much for the peach that somebody threw on stage. It got damaged on the way in. If you want to get it back, come backstage and I'd love to give it back to you personally. Except I might not be able to get it out of my hand. Which means you'll get a clenched fist right between your fucking eyes, cunt face." And to the rest of the crowd, I'd like to say hello. Yeah, then we got back and we had to do Reading Festival, which was great. It was because we went from being really low down on the bill the previous year to being headlining the B stage. So they had two stages side by side. And the idea was that they could change one band on one stage whilst the other band was playing. So they were getting Black Sabbath ready on the A stage and we were headlining the B stage. Now, I wrote something about this in the book, saying that there was a moment when but I've tried to look it up online to see if it actually happened, and there's no record of it online. So I'm assuming that if it was a fire, it wasn't much of a fire. There's no mention of it anywhere on the internet, and somebody else would have seen it. That's my memory of what we were told had been going on when we came off stage, because obviously we didn't know at the time. Maybe there was some smoke or something. But they had this comedy Stonehenge set. The movie Spinal Tap, there's a scene with Stonehenge where they make a mistake when they order it, and the manager writes down inches instead of feet, and so it ends up being like a miniature Stonehenge. With Black Sabbath, the actual reverse happened for real. They ordered this set. Their manager, Don Arden, who we've mentioned before, wrote down meters instead of feet. And they got this set that was 3 times the size of the set they'd ordered. And they couldn't use it on most of their tour because it was too big.
But they used it at Reading.
Yeah, presumably because it's outdoors, it was big enough. They had Ian Gillan on vocals, who was the singer from Deep Purple. People said, when I was looking up the fire incident, I read something where somebody said that they were still cheering for Marillion when Black Sabbath had finished.
Oh my God, that's a bit of a compliment.
But that was Reading, and Andy actually turned up and got up and played the bongos with us. The congas, I should say, not the bongos. People confuse those. Apparently, I heard this story from Luis Jardim, who plays percussion with us on the last few tours. When he was working with the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger said, I want to put some bongos on this track. And he turns up with these bongos, and Mick goes, where's the big bongos? Not those bongos, not the little bongos, I want the big ones. And, and Louisa goes, they're called congas. So he brought the wrong ones because I asked for bongos and he meant the great, the big stand-up ones.
Yeah.
So it's an easy mistake to make. Okay, the only other thing about Reading Festival, which I was pissed off about, was that I mentioned about the big bottle of piss that flew through the air and nearly hit Steve Rothery.
Yeah.
Right at the start of our set, it basically flew through the air, and I watched it happen. I don't think he even saw it, which is why he was so cool and just carried on playing. But it literally bounced at his feet and flew between his guitars at the back of the stage and off the back of the stage, which was, I think it was full of piss. But while they were tuning my Yamaha electric piano, which has got real strings, and it has to be tuned like a normal piano, during the day they opened the piano lid to tune it, and somebody threw a bottle of Coke into it. The Coke damaged the strings, and not at the time. They dried it and everything, and it seemed fine. I used it for the gig, but then over the coming weeks, there was like about an octave of bass notes that just sounded like donk, donk, donk when you played them. They had no vibration because of the Coke, what it did to the strings. So I was really pissed off about that. But anyway, that was Reading for you. Okay, that's enough from us now.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Tallulah. And thank you, everybody out there. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Chapter 8. Kill the Pape. Like Alice's White Rabbit, I was in a hurry. The promise of my own personal wonderland, or a US tour of support slots and club dates, which sounded wonderful to me, was hanging tantalizingly before me. Tarry and I'd be late, and by late I mean I'd be standing stupefied on the tarmac at Heathrow as the rest of the band took off for the land of the free. I needed a passport, and I needed a passport now. Having never been abroad, except for Ireland, I sent off my application for a UK passport. This was returned to me with a polite note explaining that I didn't qualify for a British passport as I was Irish. It went on to suggest, in a tone that a mother usually reserves for her dimmest child, that I could apply for naturalisation, but it could take up to 6 months. As I stood there ruefully thumbing the manila envelope, I knew how that unenlightened child felt. I honestly didn't even think about applying for an Irish passport. If asked, I would say I'm Irish, but I've spent most of my life in England, and back then already felt as much English as I did Irish. I'm like the opposite of the Pogue's Shane MacGowan, the middle-class Englishman posing as a working-class Irishman. And that's not where the dissimilarities end either. I've got my own teeth and can get up from a chair unaided. Fortunately, I was able to get myself an Irish passport within 24 hours by visiting the Irish Embassy in London. In 2019, I was finally naturalised, and I now hold dual British-Irish citizenship. I'm not in the slightest bit nationalistic, and I'm happy to be a citizen of the world. I find the whole being proud of your country shtick rather jingoistic, and it seems only to lead to unhappiness and conflict. Equally, I think if I identified with my Irish heritage more, I might have found some of Fisher's lyrics offensive. Forgotten Sons, which Fish always maintained wasn't pro-British or anti-Irish, is clearly written from the point of view of British soldiers and their families, or the occupying army, as many Irish people describe them. Fish often used to call me Pape, as an insulting term used by Glasgow Rangers Protestant supporters to describe rival team Celtic's Catholic fans. As I'm not a football fan or religious, I would shrug it off. Apart from when Fish leapt on me in the lounge of the tour bus, punching me in the head while shouting, "Kill the Pape!" after a few too many drinks. Then it was less easy to ignore. But before America, there was something more pressing. We had a new album to deliver. With almost undue haste, we set off for Gwynedd in North Wales to begin writing. The location chosen was as far away from civilization as possible, a rehearsal studio with very basic accommodation in a small cottage on a hillside. I remember green hills and an almost endless white sky, and getting very little done. Being deposited in the middle of nowhere was less than ideal for me with a new baby, but I didn't complain. I was trying to show the band, especially Fish, that just because I was a dad now, nothing had changed, though naturally everything had, and Susie was back living with her parents with a sparing visit or two from me. Her days weren't the only ones that felt long and drawn out. Writing was slow going. Fish had plenty of lyrics already written, but we had no music. We had also decided that She Chameleon, which had been through more changes than Spinal Tap had drummers, wasn't cutting it musically. Like most bands, writing our first album took over 2 years if you count the early versions of songs like The Web and Forgotten Sons. When someone in the band came up with a promising sounding idea, we worked on it. If we didn't have any new ideas, we didn't worry. Now, for the first time in our lives, faced with the demands of a major label wanting the next album, we had to write one to order. We had a few weeks in Wales, interspersed with making videos and playing German festivals before our debut tour of the USA and Canada. We would have a few months more to play with in the autumn, and then we would be expected to start recording our sophomore album. The only genuinely good idea we had was a riff Steve had written, which became the foundations of Assassin. Fish wanted the song to have some Eastern influences because he was channeling whirling dervish assassins in his lyrics. Steve had become the proud owner of a GR300 guitar synth made by Roland. While interesting sounding, it was only good for slow parts and drones, owing to the delay between plucking a string and the resulting sound. Steve used it to great effect for the intro of Assassin, while also ticking a few bagpipe stroke Eastern scale boxes to boot. Even the novelty of a new drummer wasn't enough to get the creative juices flowing. Moses might have come down from the mountain with 10 commandments, but we left Mountain Studios in Wales with only one song to show for our efforts. The US tour started off with some dates opening for Todd Rundgren. I was very excited to see Todd live, as I had become a fan after first hearing him warming up for Led Zeppelin a few years earlier at Nebworth Park. At Nebworth he was on fire, but headlining to half-full venues he felt more like a damp squid than a prog rock colossus. His audience, what there was of it, regarded us with a look that was quizzical at best. Our own headline gigs were in small clubs and bars, mostly half-empty too. Admittedly, the bars were bigger than the ones we left behind in the UK, but it was a humbling experience all the same. Most people, when they think about a band touring in the USA, imagine a purpose-built tour bus, gleaming chrome and tinted windows, airbrushed murals adorning the sides, the freedom of the open highways, the air filled with possibilities. On Planet Marillion in 1983, it wasn't quite like that. We travelled in an 8-seater minibus, with Paul up front driving and Ian, Clutch, Ritchie, shirtless and passed out from the heat in the back. Clutch was our merch man. He travelled with us because there was even less room in the crew van, and they usually departed the hotel earlier than we had to. Although the minibus had air conditioning, it wasn't powerful enough to cool the whole bus, so it was like the fifth circle of hell towards the back. Without being asked to, but following tour etiquette, Clutch graciously chose the back seats. It's early, the kind of early when you wake up and make a sound like you've been shot. That's how it was on the road that summer. You woke, the shuttered sunlight still hurting your eyes, crawled into the van and sat cramped, gasping for the AC unit as it made a sound like an old Cortina starting on a hill in the middle of winter, emitting about as much cool air as your average asthmatic. You'd sit like that for anything from 4 to 14 hours until you reached the next stop on the tour. The longest drives were usually on non-gig days, so even though they were marked down as days off on the tour itinerary, in reality, they were more endless miles down America's highways. On those days, We noticed Andy would leave the minibus noticeably worse for wear. We didn't understand how he was getting pissed en route until somebody saw him secretly topping off a can of Coke with some vodka. We didn't exactly approve of Andy's behaviour, but we could hardly condemn him either, as there were nights when we couldn't make out the numbers on our hotel room doors through the hazy fog of post-gig booze. I say post-gig, but one night Steve and I were sat in a bar waiting to go on stage when we chanced upon a drink we had never tried before called a Long Island iced tea. I thought, how welcoming, a taste of home right there in the glass. 4 or 5 drinks later, and it was time to go on stage. I was so wasted, I spent the entire gig propping myself up against the keyboards the way a drunk relies on a bar for leverage. I'm being kind when I say our show was shaky that night. Steve swore he would never drink before a gig again after that, a promise I believe he has kept. Note, a Long Island iced tea has nothing to do with tea. It's vodka, gin, tequila, rum and triple sec, topped off with Coke. I recommend it, unless you're operating heavy machinery or trying to play the garden party solo. Things came to a head with Andy when we were driving into New York for our final gig opening for Todd. We had a relatively short 3-hour drive from Rhode Island to Manhattan, but as it was a day off, Andy started drinking early. By the time we were driving through Harlem, Andy was drunk enough to think that throwing his empties out the window was a smart idea. It only got worse when we were all in the hotel lobby waiting for our rooms. Andy was somehow both erratic and subdued, that uneven pendulum swing of the drunk. By the end of the day, following an emergency band meeting in John's room, we decided to cancel the rest of the tour and fly home. We played the final gig of the tour to an especially hostile Todd Rundgren crowd. After Garden Party, only the second song of the set, Fish was hit square in the chest by an overripe peach. Fish, as calm as the surface of a pond, said into the mic, "I'd like to say thank you for the peach somebody threw on stage. It got damaged on the way in. If they want to get it back, come backstage and I'd love to give it back to you personally. Except I might not be able to get it out of my hand, which means you would get a clenched fist right between your fucking eyes, cunt face." To the rest of the crew, I'd like to say hello. We arrived back in the UK earlier than planned, which was just as well because we needed to find a replacement for Andy. John Arneson put the feelers out and found us a drummer at short notice. John Martyr was a competent, no-frills drummer who learned the set in a few days. We played a warm-up show in Liverpool with him, the day before we closed the summer with a triumphant return to the Reading Festival stage. In fact, Reading had 2 stages side by side. This setup was to facilitate a smoother, faster changeover between the bands. We were closing the Saturday night on the B stage with only Black Sabbath to follow us on the adjacent A stage. The crowd were restless and the air was thick with campfire smoke and projectiles flying in all directions. It was too late to reconsider our choice of opener with its slow start, Grendel. As Steve began playing the gentle picking intro, eyes closed and focused, a 2-litre plastic bottle that once contained Coke but may now have held a different, less sweet liquid came tumbling through the air in a gentle arc, clear yellow droplets cascading from the neck and catching the light as it turned end over end. Time stood still as I watched in fascinated horror as the bottle completed its journey, bouncing at Steve's feet and somehow missing the row of guitars behind him. It flew off the back of the stage with a clatter and into the darkness. Steve played on without missing a note. Fish had the audience in the palm of his hand, all 35,000 of them. That said, about halfway through the set, he started getting irritated. The audience were all looking to the right, at stage A. What was so interesting there? We found out later that Black Sabbath's comically huge Stonehenge set, inspiration for the miniature one in the movie Spinal Tap, was on fire. We played on while their crew tackled the flames. That Ian Gillan-led incarnation of Black Sabbath would go up in smoke not so long afterwards too. Andy Ward had turned up backstage earlier in the day. We invited him to join us on stage playing along on percussion. It felt like a positive note to end his time with the band.